Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rail Technology Magazine podcast, the show where we go beyond the headlines and get into the real complexities shaping our industry. Today's episode tackles something that every rail professional knows, but few talk about openly. Why do our biggest, most important rail projects so consistently struggle to deliver on time and on budget, even when we pour enormous resources and expertise into them? Well, joining me today is Dr. Asif Sharif, Managing Director for EMEA at Loadspring Solutions, with over 25 years spanning construction and cloud technology. A PhD in international procurement strategies, a hands-on experience guiding multinational companies through digital transformation. Asif brings a uniquely rigorous perspective to this question. In this episode, we're digging into the structural forces, governance failures, tool fragmentation, and the complexity of joint venture delivery that sit at the heart of rail megaproject underperformance. If you work on rail program management, this one's for you. Asif, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Nice to meet you, Roy, and all your guests. Great to be invited onto the show.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for making the time for us. So let's dig right in, I think, and set the scene. Rail mega projects are constantly under the microscope for a variety of different reasons: cost overruns, schedule delays, political uncertainty. But in your experience, what is it about these projects that makes them so fundamentally hard to manage?
It's interesting, isn't it? Rail infrastructure is something that we all sort of take for granted, but is critical to the way that we live as people, right? In cities, in different countries and around the world. It's the main form of transportation, has been for many centuries. Yeah, it's taken over by road and air more recently, but actually rail infrastructure is critical. And if you just reflect on the rail infrastructure in the UK, it's 150, 200 years old, right? We haven't really invested heavily in rail infrastructure for a very, very long time. And the infrastructure has done a really great job to get us to where we are today. But actually now what we need to do is take a step back and think about, okay, how do we modernize that infrastructure based on new technologies, new modes of train transportation, electrification, signaling, safety, all those good things. And actually overlay that with quite a complicated network of roads and villages and cities and communities that we've got to work through and round and under and over and all those sort of good things. So they're very complicated projects, and actually it's not a project, it's actually like a mega scheme or a giga project. These schemes are huge. They require a huge amount of investment. They require multiple headed organizations to design and think about how they should be delivered. And then more importantly, to deliver them from a contractor or a main contractor or a joint venture point of view, and then the supply chain that needs to be underneath them to help deliver those schemes. So actually, they are incredibly complicated by the nature of where we are now in history and the type of transportation, the type of movement we're expecting from trains, and the speeds at which we need to go on to get from location A to location B. And actually they also require a huge amount of management because of the complexity of organizations that are involved. You've got many different organizations involved, from a client point of view, from a consultancy point of view, and a design point of view, through to a consultation point of view, i.e. the communities that it's around and that it's going to be servicing, to then a delivery point of view, which is the contractors and the subcontractors and suppliers that are involved in delivering those themes. So it's actually a perfect recipe for a really, really sophisticated case study. And HS2 is a good example of that, right? It's an exceptional project. It's a big investment. It's going to take a lot of time, but it's going to revolutionize for many, many years to come in the future how we use rail transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you leap straight into HS2 there. That's just one of the high-profile case studies that we've had in the United Kingdom. You've got the Crossrail projects as well, which is now the Elizabethan line. Up in the north, we've got the Trans-Pennine Route upgrade. We've got aspirations for Northern Powerhouse Rail for improved east-west connectivity. So what do you think these programs actually reveal about, say, some of the structural problems around major rail delivery? The length of delivery, for instance, is a good starting point, I think.
Well, I think the length's really important. These schemes don't get delivered in 6 months or 12 months, right? They take many years to deliver. So HS2 and lots of the Network Rail programs, in particular Trans-Pennine Route Upgrade, have been in gestation for 5, 10 years, right? And they have still got another 5, 10 years to be delivered until the train or the rolling stock comes on those lines.
Yeah.
And that just demonstrates the complexity associated with delivering these schemes, not only having the right organizations with the right skills and the right resources, but also the right technology in place. And this is not a technology play. This is not about have we got the right scheduling tool or the cost management tool or the design tool. Those tools are great, but it's how you put everything together. How do you put design teams together and construction teams together and communities around the environments that these tools are going to service and the client so that everything is aligned, right? You've got different tools being used by different parts of the supply and demand chain, and you've got different reporting that's happening all the time across many layers of organizations that are involved. And it's sometimes quite complicated to get a real version of what's happening on the site. You know, the client who's funding the delivery of this asset typically wants to know exactly where we are, what we're spending, what we've got to spend, and what the major delays are that we're going to be facing, and how do we overcome them. From the designer's point of view, is a completely different set of requirements and maybe KPIs that they're looking at, and same for contractors. So the way that we're using tools and the information that we're generating from those tools and the reporting sometimes is quite misaligned. I think the other structural issue is that there are lots of different tools being used by the different teams. And these teams themselves aren't just one homogenous organization. Within the construction teams, you'll have hundreds of companies involved in the delivery. So if you just again look at HS2 as an example, there's sort of 5 main joint ventures that are on the phase 1A of the HS2 line, which is sort of from London up to the Midlands in Birmingham, and actually all vary in size and service that they're delivering. So we're servicing actually all 5 of those different joint ventures, and helping the joint venture teams, which are made up of very large individual contractors all working together at the very higher level to demonstrate actually and implement a strategy to deliver that part of the line, and then the many hundreds of subcontractors that then work for that joint venture team. So, you know, the Belford BT Vinci joint venture, which is the Old Oak Common in the Midlands region, we've been supporting for many years, since 2021. A line joint venture that has done the tunnelling, we've been supporting since 2017. And there are, you know, there's BAM as well, Sistra. There are many organisations that we've been supporting in those joint ventures, because actually that was a number of organisations all trying to work together to deliver a series of data sets that will enable them to report upwards to their client and also downwards to their supply chain, so everything is aligned and they can deliver on time and on cost.
So I think then it's an interesting segue to make for the viewers, just to explain where you sit in these projects, how you help all these parties work together. You know, how would you describe what you do and how you help projects at a dinner party?
So Loadspring provides something called a unified project platform, which is essentially a managed service that allows a platform to be created for the delivery of assets. Right. And so let's talk about rail assets, whether it's a network rail asset or it's a HS2 asset, like, you know, one of the joint ventures. You've got different organizations involved in different segments of the work, all trying to work consistently and collectively to deliver for a particular project or a particular program or a particular phase of an asset. So what Loadspring's UPP, the Unified Project Platform, does is it provides an independent UK hosted and managed environment for the joint venture teams the client and the supply chain to access in terms of the applications that are critical. So typically we manage sort of costing applications, risk applications, design applications, schedule applications that have been deemed to be selected. We don't select the tools, the team select the tools. They use best of breed tools for different phases of the work, whether it's cost, risk, schedule, design. And what we do is we create one unified environment for these tools to sit in for the joint venture team and for them to all access and start creating data sets against. And it's not just providing an environment where you've just hosted the tools, because the hosting is just a small part of the managed service. The managed service is actually about ensuring that the tool is performant, it's secure, it's supported, the users are supported. So any user that has a username and password into our environment for a particular project or program or client or joint venture is supported within 15 minutes by our support team. So we start to triage the problem, we understand what they're doing, we share screens with them, we try and really figure out, okay, how do we get them working again as quickly as possible? And that's our ambition, to get people up and running back to work as quickly as possible when they've identified a problem. And as a byproduct of that, you're creating an environment where you've got lots of different companies using a set of different tools in a consistent way, being supported consistently, and then a growth of the data sets that sits then in different database structures, if you like, under schedule, cost, risk, or design.
So it sounds like you can pull everything together and offer a project a lot of governance.
Yeah, governance is really important because we from a very high level, you want to make sure that, and especially on some of these key critical infrastructure projects, the client often dictates, look, you have to use this standard of service. You have to use a scheduling tool that has this sort of capability, that has this sort of functionality, that provides this sort of output. So once that's been decided, and that's why we don't determine which tools that a company uses. They tell us what they want to use. We then create the unified platform for all these tools to be accessed and used and supported within. So yes, it creates governance in terms of we've got to make sure that people are using the right tool, the right version. There's no change in that tool. So one of the things that's happening is that as more and more tools go towards 100% SaaS availability, so they're on the cloud. It's a bit like your Netflix account or your Facebook account. When the vendor decides to upgrade stuff, it just changes. So the next time you log in, you see a slightly different interface, functionality changes, things which were there before aren't there anymore, and new things arrive. The challenge you have with project controls is that when you're dealing with large, complicated programs of work that span over many, many years, you want to minimize any changes and you want to actually manage how you migrate things. So to be able to control versions is really critical on different tools, because actually rarely do project controls teams just look at one set of data from one tool. What they'll do is they look at one set of data from one tool and another and another and another, collate that data, and then start analyzing and evaluating what that means. What insights is that giving us? And actually, if you've got those tools changing, that's a problem. The second thing is if you've got integration links between tools, so you've got an integration link between a scheduling tool and a risk tool. If those tools then start to come out of sync with each other, typically those integrations will break. So you're just about to run a report. One of the tools has been upgraded, didn't realize that actually when I pull my report, that's going to break the link that I had set up. We might have developed an API to link two tools together. As soon as those tools change, those links break. So we've got a delay in the process. And this is about ensuring that we've got a platform that's structured, that's codified, that's available, that's supported, and that's consistent. It's not to say that it never changes. It does change. We can migrate, but we do it in a very structured way with the team and with the applications that they need to be migrated at the time they need to be migrated. So we're trying to sort of reduce the risk associated with things in the platform changing.
So you're reducing the risk. I imagine you all have to be extremely agile then in your approach to mitigate against that and identify, weaknesses within the chain. How would you describe governance as a structure on paper vs governance as something that would actually work in practice?
So again, we don't make any changes without the customers being informed. And typically the only changes that we will insist on if there is a security breach within an application, if we find there's a vulnerability or there's something that would cause a some sort of breach in an overall security policy, we will insist that a change needs to be made. So it could be to do with an operating system, right? And you might think, well, actually, I'm using this particular tool, but it runs on a certain operating system. So if we see a vulnerability there, we will proactively inform the client what's happening, why it's happening, and we will insist on a change being made, because actually what we don't want is that whole environment to be infected or implicated. So that's where we're taking a lead. Typically, the way we work when it comes to governance is that actually we talk to the customer about what is really critical to them, and typically it's security, right? It's making sure that there's no cyber challenges. It's ensuring that we can audit and we have full compliance of exactly who's logged in from where, when, and what they're doing. And also things like, where does your data sit? Where is your data sovereignty? And when it comes to national infrastructure programs, data sovereignty is very, very important, right? You want your primary and secondary data within a particular sovereignty in a particular location. You want to make sure that the people that have access to that have been approved, right? They've gone through the appropriate checks and balances so that you're not just getting a hosted environment in a particular region, but actually it's been supported by some other part of the world and a team that doesn't sit where we're sitting, right? So it's about ensuring that actually all of those levels of compliance and governance are met. So we ensure that that's documented and we discuss that with the customer. And then we talk about, okay, so how do you want upgrades to work? How do you want changes to happen? We don't just change the environment. We work with the customer to ensure that it meets their program, their requirements. There is a process to ensure that any changes that are made, be it a version upgrade or be a change in the infrastructure, is tested first, right? So we have a parallel non-production UAT environment where those changes happen, but your production environments stay exactly as they were. And once the testings have been completed and proved, we then migrate you to that new environment. So we're trying to minimize any disruption to the availability, support, and the performance of the applications that we are managing on behalf of the team.
Yeah. So when governance starts to feel more like a compliance exercise rather than, say, an active management tool, at what point does that tend to go wrong? How does that shift happen? What does it look like from the inside? What are the early markers for you to identify so then you can jump on that and get it back on track as a management tool?
Ultimately, because of the service that we provide, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of users that are on a platform for a particular customer, right? So Network Rail have been a customer for ours since 2014, right? We managed all of their major programs of work. So there's hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations that are on that and associated numbers of users. It's really important that actually ultimately we are making sure that everything runs securely, performantly, and is supported appropriately. So governance is very important, i.e. the platform needs to be secure, it needs to meet the latest agreed standards and regulations. Nothing should be out of sync with what the organization wants. But more importantly, we've got to carry on delivering the day-to-day function, which is, you're a user and you need to get onto the platform and access data and complete an activity, right? So we've got to make sure that governance doesn't take over that. Governance is often part of the overarching architecture of how we're going to establish the environment and maintain and support the environment going forward. The users are critical, right? What the users are doing, what they're seeing, how the performance is affecting and what support they need is something we do day to day. So that from our point of view, they're two different things. If we start to see that governance is impacting the user's ability to use the system, right, then that's a problem, because we want to make sure that people can use it, because ultimately this is a platform to enable teams to more effectively use tools to deliver their day job, which is, I'm a planner, I need to get my planning data up to date and submitted on time. If governance is stopping that, that's a challenge.
Okay, so with so many users, So many different projects, different organizations, so many joint ventures, so much accountability. How do you drill into, or how do you cut through multiple versions of the truth on complex programs and get to the real nub?
A lot of it is to do with how we're reporting on the data and how the data is connected together. It's really important to understand that, rail infrastructure programs are really big and quite complicated because of the nature of the size of the teams involved and what we're actually delivering as an asset. But laboratories are equally as complicated. The facilities can be very, very complicated. It's making sure that we've got the right people doing the right thing at the right time and then reporting accurately. One of the challenges we often see is that, there is no one tool in the market that you use for all elements of project controls. So you've got to accept that there are actually different tools used for different disciplines. Then we've got to think about, okay, so how do we integrate those tools? And integration is great when it works, but it's terrible when it breaks.
Yeah.
So relying on integration as the only way of gluing tools together is a challenge. We've also then got to look at the quality of data that's coming out of each individual tool, because even when you've got integration, if the tools actually aren't updated appropriately, if we're starting to see inaccurate data being generated by the users at the grassroots level, then the results what we're going to get, the reports that we're going to get, are inaccurate. So over the last 10 years, we've started to look at that with our customers, and we're looking at the data that's being generated by different tools, whether it's scheduling tools or cost tools or risk tools. And we're trying to establish, okay, so why is it common to have this sort of watermelon approach to reporting, right? So by that, we mean that everything's green, 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 and then 75% into the project, you cut through it and it's suddenly red. There was no amber sign, right? But the reality is we know that there is a problem occurring, but our reporting tends to hide it until we get to a point where it becomes critical, and then it's just red, right? And we've got 25% of the time left to complete the project. We've used 80% of the budget, 90% of the resources are gone, and we've got to complete a lot of work. And we're in a situation where we need to do something extreme. So one of the things that we've been developing with our customers is to look at, okay, as we start to generate data from a scheduling tool or from a cost tool or from a risk tool on the early stages of the project, let's try and look at the quality of that data. Let's see how much is complete and incomplete. Let's see how much is incorrect, right? Based on their quality standards, not Loadspring's, it's the client's sort of quality and governance standards. And let's start automating the ability to check that data every day, right? So we're going to check your schedule data against your quality requirements to ensure that it's meeting those quality standards. So there's no obvious gaps in the data. And if there are, we're highlighting them and we're fixing them at that point. Because actually, if we start doing that early enough in a project and we do it regularly and it's automated and we're responding back to the people that are responsible for generating that data, the result is that we're going to get much higher quality and more accurate data presented in each different discipline. What we can then do is think about how do we align that data. So we've got some really strong schedule data, we've got some really strong cost data, and we've got some good risk data. How can we then align that data so that we can get a broader picture and a better insight into exactly what's happening on our program?
So you're not just providing a system, are you? You're not just providing technology. You're providing a path forward. It sounds like you're working in partnership with that project team. You're looking at the delivery objectives. You're looking at the desired outcomes, and you're helping to keep that project on track by looking at the data to identify, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the project that may, finish it early or derail it, pardon the pun, to make sure that all of the stakeholders are laser focused on the final outcome.
Yeah, I mean, we're not an SME. We're not a subject matter expert in terms of project controls, we're not a consultancy. There are many, many excellent organizations that we work with, thankfully, right, that do that skill. They're planning experts, they're risk experts, they're cost experts, they're design experts, they're change experts. What we're trying to do is furnish them with the data and the insights that allows them to go, aha, there's something that you didn't perceive. Here's something by connecting this data set to this data to this data set. Here's what we're seeing out of that. The technology layer we're providing, obviously the unified platform allows you to put the tools together, both ones that we host, but also ones that are SaaS only, because we can connect to SaaS tools. And we have many connections to, the dominant SaaS tools that are being used in project controls already. But having one environment that then you start to bring this data into, and then you quality check it on a daily or a weekly basis to ensure that when you want to run your report on cost or schedule or risk, that the quality of that data is what you expect, 60, 70, 80, 90% accurate, because we all want to get to 100, but the reality is that there's reasons why we're never 100% accurate all the time. What we can then see is, okay, how do we link the cost data to the risk data? So we've got a natural language query element to our service as well, as many organizations have, right? But there's a difference with what we do. So we connect our data sets. We start looking at an ETL process that then cleans and structures the data sets. And then we have the ability to ask a question on those data sets. Now, you may think, well, that's no different to using ChatGPT. Well, it is, because actually what we're doing is we're laser focused on the data set that you have given us, or the customer has given us in this particular environment. There's no external data we're going to. There's no pushing what we've got in this environment to another customer, or drawing in from other customers into this environment. So it's the ability to look at your program's data, make sure it's clean and accurate and relevant, and then start asking some really interesting questions and starting seeing some patterns emerging as to what's happening on the project. And that gives your SMEs a lot of evidence to go, here's the action we need to take. Because a lot of time the consultancy team have a really good feeling of what's happening and what should happen. And what they need is often some underlying data to support that, or indeed contradict it if that's the case. And that's where we'll come in. We'll come in by giving them the ability to audit and report on exactly what the data is saying. And then they use their experience, knowledge, and intuition to help determine a path forward.
So it really sounds like it gives them a lot of confidence in taking the next action they need to take in order to get the job done.
Absolutely. It's interesting because as you start to think about AI and machine learning, we're fixated with using it, and it looks great on the surface, but the reality is, unless you've got a very focused business case for it to be used, it typically fails. 80% of projects are failing with AI unless it's really laser focused on solving a particular business challenge. But the most important and critical thing is the quality of the data it's being fed.
Yeah.
So if the quality of that data which is being fed is slightly suspect, or is not accurate, or is just quite generic, then the results it's going to give you are going to be highly accurate, very quick, and persuasive, but wrong. Right? And that's what we want to try and avoid. We don't want to get you the wrong answer. We want to get you the right answer quickly, based on the evidence of the data that you have created on your program. And that's why this is very, there's a term called hyper-personalization, right? It's being used a lot in this sort of space at the moment, where we're trying to make this very unique service based on your specific requirements, or the program's specific requirements. And that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to make this very laser focused on the data you're generating on this program from the various tools that you're using, once it's been quality checked, to give you appropriate insights.
Yeah. Asif, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I really wanted you to get onto the podcast to share some of the insight you've got at Loadspring with the projects that you work on and help on, because in my job in the business that I run, we talk about projects all the time. We talk about projects online, in news, in the magazine, and at the events that we run across the country. And they are at the epicenter of the rail industry. There's always a project happening, whether it's a mega project, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, or whether it's, small day-to-day stuff that help keeps the rail industry moving. And I think you've articulated extremely well something that a lot of people feel they perhaps struggle to name in this industry, that the root of underperformance isn't a lack of tools or effort, it's the fragmentation between them. And for anyone who's listening who wants to explore the Loadspring Solutions approach to project platform integration, we'll have links in the show notes. Thanks for joining us today, Asif. Really enjoyed our conversation.